And over to both of you.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having us today. We're very excited to be here. Just to give a little context, I think it would probably be a little easier for us to just call each other coordinators of user education. But Cara and I work very closely with first-year students at Paterson University and provide a lot of foundational research and information literacy skills that they build on in upper-level classes. Today we're going to talk about an approach to first-year library instruction that we began exploring back in 2018, but that has evolved, as have so many other things, especially since COVID-19 happened. So without further ado, we're going to dive right in and share some of our discoveries, some of our trials and tribulations.
So we want to take you through a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. So we're just going to go really quick into a bit of a history of first-year instruction at Paterson, including the library's role in it. We'll then talk about our experience with guided lessons and how we planned and eventually delivered, and this planning, the results and assessment, and finally our future planning. So we'll start with the background. And I'm so sorry, Laura, I'm getting a message saying subtitles aren't currently available. Is that my mic only, or is that everyone?
That would be me dropping something on my keyboard unexpectedly.
Oh, okay. Okay, sorry.
I apologize.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure.
No. Best laid plans. Come on.
So while we're putting the slides back up, I just want to give you a very quick overview of Paterson University. We're kind of a smaller state school. We're in northeastern New Jersey. Our FTE is about 10,000. And for the past 10 years, first-year instruction has gone through major changes. So for the first couple slides, I'm going to focus on what it was before Will.Power, which is what it is now and what we developed this content for. So before Will.Power, it was first-year seminar, and then it was Pioneer Success Seminar. And honestly, the two of them were very similar. The biggest change was the amount of credit hours. So first year seminar was a credit and a half for the year. Pioneer Success was only 1 credit. But they both had the same type of content. So all students had to take this course for graduation. We're all information literacy librarians, or at least interested in information literacy if you're here today. So you've probably heard of a class like this. It's an intro to college type class. So the students would learn not only just how to use their own colleges, I guess the different systems there, but they also learn like stress management, those sorts of different skills they would need to be successful throughout college. This one had about 50 to 75 sections each year. And the instructors, which were a combination of Paterson faculty and Paterson staff, would bring in guest lectures each semester. The library was considered one of the guest lecturers. So each year we would work with the different instructors and they would set up library sessions with us. We would reach about 85% of the total sections each year. As this is an intro to college course and as it's only a 1 credit course, there was no research-based assignment, which we know the students don't especially love. So we really focused on the basics. We focused on basic searching and we focused on source evaluation. So just a little bit more about the library instruction sessions. This is pre-COVID, everything is in person. This is the one class that all librarians at Paterson have to teach. So to make things easier on librarians who maybe teaching isn't their favorite thing, Tony and I developed a standardized lesson for them to use every year. So we wrote a script, we had an instruction session with all the librarians, so they'd be ready to go come fall when all these classes come in. The longer we did this, the more we explored with active learning and we used the flipped classroom often, and different types of student engagement to get them more interested in just the lecture and this is how to library. We wanted to make sure it wasn't just that. So now we have Will.Power. So this is a complete overhaul from previous years. The big change is instead of students getting credit for this course, this is now a non-credit bearing experience, yet they're still meeting with a facilitator, not an instructor, twice a week for about 50 minutes. As this is not a graded class, as the facilitator is again, not an instructor facilitator, they're not actually teaching. So they're presenting other areas content, including ours. So each week there's different themes for the Will.Power students to attend. 1 week is diversity and cultural competency. 1 is wellness and coping. And 1 is ours, which is information literacy and research. The students have 2 weeks of library. So in the fall and in the spring, and each time we differentiated the content and instruction. Finally, the students are loosely grouped into cohorts, mostly based on their major, but in some cases, some of them have the same classes together. So with our collaboration with it, we heard about this in spring 2019, and we were immediately involved in the planning committee for this, which is fantastic. So we were able to say the library is essential for the students, they should see us, this is how they should see us. So we were seen as an integral component. One thing that was a little challenging, some people know that they know what the library does, they know it's important, but they don't know why it's important, and they really don't know what the library does, even though they say they do. So part of what we were doing is saying, no, we're not going to teach them every single database for a 50-minute session when we're not there. We need to really expand on these information literacy skills. So a big part of what we did was correcting these stereotypes and getting the students in for information literacy instruction, not just how to library. So what we did with them is we worked around the ACRL framework. So on the next slide, we have a cute little graphic about it. And we focused on the information literacy dispositions. So if you work with the framework, if you're comfortable, the idea is that it's not just standards, it's lifelong learning, it's skills that you can't unlearn. So that's what we really focused on. We worked on student learning outcomes focused on these dispositions for our content. So we didn't want to throw them into PsycInfo or these intense databases yet. We reserved intense search mechanics for any subject-based instruction with authentic assignments. So what we did is we worked with the different faculty and said, if your students are having an assignment with the facilitators, and we said, if your students are having an assignment, let us know and we'll reach out to that faculty and schedule a subject-based instruction class. So that would go in tandem with our content. Our content was a guided lesson, the same to reach all first-year students and ensure consistency. And now I'll turn it back over to Tony, who will explain that in more detail.
Okay, great. So the big question you might be asking is, what do you mean by guided lessons? Because this could be interpreted in a number of ways. It's a little ambiguous if you think about it, because most of us probably use scripts or outlines when we plan our instruction. So what we want to do is just talk a little bit about what this means, this concept means to us, and how we incorporated it into our first year instruction program. So we use the phrase guided lesson to refer to a directed path through the instructional content that any librarian or guide, if you will, can follow. So it's a sort of a trajectory that anyone can follow and teach the same information. So it's based on a script and learning objectives, just like any other lesson is, and provides a framework to keep delivery consistent. So for instance, there are some librarians, because every librarian teaches first year seminar, every librarian teaches Will.Power. Some are more abbreviated than others. Some get through the content very quickly. Others take a little bit longer and maybe don't get to everything. And as we've seen in the past, there are some that just go off script altogether and teach something completely different. So what we really wanted to do was ensure that this guided lesson kept everyone on the same path and provided the same instructional content to every student that we were able to reach. So we do this using slides, for lack of a better term. You could use PowerPoint. We developed an online web-based module that we use. You could use videos. All of these things are practical for developing a directed path or a guided lesson. But it's not just the content delivery. Guided lessons also have opportunities for engagement through questions, quizzes, and hands-on active learning. So it's really designed to be sort of a framework to build in these other ideas. So where am I? There we go. So just to step back a little bit, we want to talk to you a little bit about our early guided lessons. So this is pre-Will.Power, but this leads us into what we're currently doing. We began using this guided lesson method back in 2018 as sort of a hybrid approach to instruction with first year students to explore the topics relevant to the movie Hidden Figures. So earlier versions of first year instruction had a common reader or a common experience that students all participated in. Using a homegrown web-based approach, students watched 2 flip videos and completed a short assessment before coming to class. Now, that all sounds pretty standard at this point, but what we then did was took the results of those and automatically imported them into a in-class module. So as the in-class session started, librarians had access to all of the students' results and could start by discussing any challenges they had, any confusion, or what they understood, basically. This was followed by an in-class guided exploration of the topic. So again, that path, those slides that sort of guide the discussion, that dealt with source evaluation, and they also incorporated those active learning activities. So we asked students to select keywords from a group of options, to find articles and sort of justify and to evaluate a website. But these responses were, again, immediately available. So that engagement happened using a little bit of technology right away. And this was a really successful first attempt at using this guided lesson idea. And we did see an increase in student engagement. So that was really promising for us. The next semester, we shifted because we didn't want to teach the same thing 2 semesters in a row. The students don't need to learn the same lesson over and over. And we went with a session called Are You Information Literate? That sort of took a different take, breaking down some of the assumptions that students have about online sources, and using interesting kind of fun, quirky examples. You know, that you can see on the slide, there's which is the real headline, which is the fake one, and having students really think about how easy it is that they might be fooled online, but also to get them thinking more deeply. We used QR codes and students' own phones to sort of move us out of the classroom. We weren't restricted to a lab anymore because their phones could provide that same engagement. And as with before, all of the results were automatically made available on the screen. So these 2 early sort of attempts worked really well for us. And we planned to do more with it, but then, as we all know, dun, 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 COVID-19. Everything had to change, everything shifted, and everything shifted very quickly. We all transitioned to virtual instruction, but we also had to look at different ways of approaching what we had been doing so far. And one of the big challenges was the inequities that sort of popped up out of this. Not all students had computers, not all students had internet access, and some didn't even have a private place where they could study or a computer that was dedicated to themselves. So all of these challenges made it very difficult. And in response, the Will.Power program decided to keep everything asynchronous, including the library. So we had to kind of shift gears from this in-person model to something a little different. So here's how we did it. Now, I'm going to kind of gloss over spring 2020 because spring 2020 was our transition period, but I'd give you a little bit of context. Because we were entirely in person before this, we did have to make some significant adjustments, and we did make them very quickly. We won't lie, it wasn't as successful as we'd hoped in terms of the number of students that participated, but the results we had were good. We had developed a self-paced module, students did it on their own, but turnout was fairly abysmal. But it did show us, though, that this guided idea worked really well, and it was something that we should look at for the fall 2020 semester. So we made lemonade out of lemons. In fall 2020, campus reopened. Not entirely. We had a lot of virtual, a lot of online classes, but the first-year students, more specifically, were brought back to have the college experience, to meet with these cohorts and participate in the Will.Power program and make those connections that they needed to make. Will.Power remained asynchronous, even though students were here, and that included the library. As Cara mentioned before with Will.Power, the move was made because the content was asynchronous to have the facilitators, non-instructors, non-grading instructors provide the content that we had developed. So we had to make the best of it, and we did. So for the fall 2020, spring 2021 semesters, we developed an asynchronous version of our guided lesson. This model consists of a pre-recorded video to be presented by the facilitators during an in-class Will.Power session. So it was designed to be a group activity. The detailed video presents information literacy concepts and offers room for engagement with material similar to the in-person lessons, and we'll go into sort of the details of that in a moment. The second part was this Wednesday activity, which didn't necessarily have to happen on a Wednesday, but primarily did. And this is a self-paced guided activity that gives students a chance for the hands-on engagement with the content that we presented in the video, but as well as an opportunity to do some self-reflection on their experience. I'm mentioning this, but this is not really part of the guided lesson approach, but there was also an optional library module where students could learn more if they chose to, but the main focus was on these two main components. So we developed a 2-semester curriculum, sort of like we did in 2018 to 2019. We wanted to differentiate between the first and second semesters of Willpower. And we used learning outcomes based on the ACRL framework. Earlier, Cara showed you that great diagram. We didn't actually try to tackle all of the frames. We really did focus on just a handful. During the fall semester, we directed our instruction primarily at the incoming students. So knowing that they were new to campus, we wanted to give them an overview of the library, its resources and services, to introduce basic searching, so with our discovery layer with Primo, and to warn them a little bit about plagiarism, get them comfortable with the idea, and think about how they would address that. The spring semester delved a little bit deeper, and we focused on the parts of the research process, including the feelings and emotions that go along with it. So the stress and the anxiety that might come along with it, as well as the good feelings of doing a good job. But we really wanted to make them understand that they weren't alone if they felt like a fish out of water during the process. So that was our main focus. The asynchronous video was fairly simple to create. We used Camtasia and YouTube and hosted on YouTube. And it introduced these basic library and information literacy concepts related to whatever theme that semester might have had. It was the responsibility of the Will.Power facilitator to present the video and the content in class. And what we did was we provided a detailed outline with question prompts, talking points. So we tried to prepare the facilitators as much as possible. We felt that these concepts were a little bit more, not generic, but general, talking about the trustworthiness of sources and that sort of thing, than if they were teaching how to do research. So we felt that this was a pretty good match if we provided enough guidance. Additionally, we built in these stop and discuss sections where students were presented with a question or a scenario that they were expected to talk about with those in their cohort. And this is where that outline really came in handy. The Wednesday activity we built with Qualtrics software. The Qualtrics is very similar to any other survey tool. You could use Google Forms if you're more comfortable with that. But it not only sort of guided the students through this scenario, if you'll notice in the example, we present them with sort of a starting point that they're expected to write a paper. But in that scenario, they then get a lot of choice as to what topic they explore as they go through some of the steps from the research process that was presented in the video. It was designed to be offered during the next class session and build on the video content. And during the spring semester, we really focused on keyword generation development, comparing the search between a database and Google, and then that self-reflection piece to really kind of see where they were in terms of understanding why they might use one source over another. Questions were definitely presented as part of this broader scenario, but they were linked to the different learning outcomes to make sure that we could later on assess them. All of this information was available on a dedicated web page. The video was embedded, the documents were linked. And while this was available to facilitators and they were expected to share it with their students during the dedicated library week, week 4, Cara's going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges we had with sort of having all the information available in one place. I'm going to pass it back over to her.
Thanks. And I did want to mention too that we met with the facilitators once in the fall and once in the spring, about a week or two before before the library week was supposed to start. So we explained everything. We directed them what to do. The coordinators of the program also knew what to do. We had our plan in place. So how did we do? So first I want to just quickly talk about the assessment methods that we did for the fall and the spring. So for the fall, our idea for assessment was a post-test the facilitators would send to their students at the end of the week. We also started our Wednesday activity, and we honestly, in one of those meetings, someone said, oh, hey, my week is doing this activity in addition to our content. We're like, oh my God, let's do that. That sounds amazing. So we threw together this Wednesday activity, and it was optional for the fall. Our response in the post-test was very low. So we didn't have a great response rate for assessment. So we wanted to fix that. So for the spring, we asked if we could make this Wednesday activity an essential component, part of our delivery, and the coordinator said yes. So that was our assessment. So instead of the post-test right after, we had this as kind of a formative assessment of the students directly trying to find sources using the concepts that we talked about in the research process. So just some quick statistics for the guided video. Spring 2021, we had 457 views. Again, we're not sure how many of those were the class showing it and how many of those were individual. What's noticeable though, that it was a 44% increase over fall 2020. I am really excited about the Wednesday activity because once we made it an essential component, that shot up 558% over fall 2020. So now we have this really good content for assessment data. We had 419 students complete it. 51 were definitely a group or a team, but again, we don't know if some people completed it and just didn't include all their team members when they filled it out. But we were really happy with this, and we're able to use this as a way to assess the information. So really quick, we had a very qualitative Wednesday activity, so we're still analyzing everything, but I did want to point out some of the things that came up from the assessment. So what we did with the activity is we asked students to think of a topic you're interested in, preferably one that you're working on in another class. And that was what you're going to use, because we're hoping the students can find this information to go back and do their assignment. We noticed that the students struggled with keywords. And we also noticed that that was part of the video. So we were a little curious why that was still happening. A lot of students had really great follow-up questions when we asked them to think of a topic and then think about what questions you have about the topic. Some though asked questions like, how do I do this? Or how do I figure out what my credit score is? So things outside of actual research, they were thinking more fact-based. And that is a concept we brought up in the video. So we were kind of wondering if the responses, some of the responses suggested that some people maybe didn't view the video prior to the activity. Because again, and I'll explain this a little bit later too, we're not in the classroom with the facilitators as they showed it. One thing that I did find interesting that we want to point out is one of the questions we asked the students to try to find an article in one of the databases and then try to find it in Google and tell us where you got the best results, what was the easiest to use, and what you most likely use for research. So full disclosure, I was like, all right, they're all going to say they're going to use the library databases for research. And no, I don't know why I thought that, but as you can see, it's kind of an even split. More of them did say the best results came from the library databases, and to no one's surprise, most of them thought Google was easier. The most likely to use for research is much, much closer than I would like it to be. But again, project information literacy suggests students really do have this preference for Google. So these are part of the results that we can go back when we work on this for the fall. We can really work on what makes students more comfortable with Google versus the library databases, and just try to make them at least understand that the better one for research, more often than not, is the library databases. So continuing on with the assessment, we did notice some successes from there that we're, again, really happy about. So we delivered asynchronous content to over 1,000 students, and this content went to all Will.Power sections and students. So in the very beginning of this, I had brought up that we did not see all first-year students in the earlier iterations of this, and now ideally we did, which is fantastic. All students got 2 interactions with the library content, if not more so. So they saw us in the fall, they saw us in the spring, they had discussions with their facilitators, and they completed this activity. So they really had a lot of interactions with the library content. They also had, I have a little asterisk, and I promise I'll get to that in the next slide. They had meaningful engagement with the library content too. We didn't want to throw a video at them at the library and not have them do anything else. We wanted to make sure they were reflecting on it. We wanted to make sure they were talking about it. And finally, we wanted to make sure we had that assessment on them. Finally, we could not have done this without the support from the Will.Power coordinators, and it was really helpful that we had that support, but it also showed that they saw us as an essential component to the students' first year instruction and education. So again, that was really, for us, that's a success. There were challenges though. So The first one and the biggest one to me is the lack of the library oversight. We don't, again, we presented everything to the facilitators. If they followed our instructions, the students should have seen the video, 2 days later, done the Wednesday activity. But we're not in the classroom with the facilitators, so we don't know if they did what we told what they were supposed to do. We don't know. The other thing to me that's frustrating to me is this worked with the pandemic. However, one of the things that I would always do when I was first teaching first year instruction is I would say at the end of the session, you know, it's first year instruction, they don't have an assignment, so we're doing some basic library things. Like, if you forget everything, just remember you can go to a librarian to get help. They miss that with this because they don't see a face. They hear a friendly voice in the video, and if they attended one of the modules, they met a librarian virtually, but they miss that meeting the librarian. And we know that library anxiety is a thing. We know students can be intimidated to talk to someone. And to me, that's a big challenge for this type, is they miss that. We actually had a major issue with scheduling. When this was set, President's Day was not accounted for. And unfortunately, week 4, which was our week, Monday, the college was closed. So the coordinators said that the students would watch the video on the Wednesday and turn in the assignment by the Friday instead, but there was some confusion. Then we looked at the results, and unfortunately, when we went, so Qualtrics to get the timestamp, and I know Google Forms does this too, we saw that the Wednesday activity results were recorded weeks ahead of our plan rollout, not just earlier in the week. We're talking week 1 or 2 and 3 in some cases. So we don't know why our content was shared before it was supposed to be shared. And we also don't know if that means that the facilitators just gave them this assignment and show the video. And we also don't know if they did this before we met with the facilitators, because we met with the facilitators 2 weeks before week 4, and we had timestamps from before that. So that was, for me, that was, and for both of us, that was really frustrating because we lost that connection there. And finally, it feels like every year our institution has gone through some reasonable change with first year instruction. So every year it feels like we're playing catch up, and we're rewriting, and we're designing new curriculum, and we're trying to figure things out. This year was especially challenging. So both Tony and I are not specifically first year librarians, even though it is a major component of what we do. We have other responsibilities. So this became consuming, trying to fit this in. And again, that's okay. And we're happy with what we designed, but we have ideas for next year to possibly make it a little more streamlined.
So we had some successes, we had some challenges. I will say, though, I will agree with Cara that the partnership that we have with Willpower, even though it wasn't perfect, really was a driving force in making this a success as far as we are concerned. But where do we go from here? At the moment, the goal of the administration is to return to normal operations by fall 2021. So this next academic year, we will be mostly back on campus. So even though these successes were great, some things are going to have to change. So as we look ahead to 2021-2022 academic year, regardless of our delivery method, whether it's synchronous, asynchronous, or live, we will need to adjust our approach based on the lessons we've learned over the past few semesters. First, we need to work more closely with Willpower programming to coordinate design of the library-related content. And this isn't simply just the rollout and what they're asking us to do, but making sure that anything we do provide ties as closely to the library information literacy curriculum as we can, to really make sure that what we're asking them to do enhances their understanding and their student success. Next, we need to incorporate controls. So this comes into the early rollout that guide the release of the content. So to make sure that things don't get rolled out early, as we saw this semester, so that we have less uncertainty as to how things were put together. We do need to carefully review our assessment data from this past year and tweak it. Even the best surveys have things that don't quite go as you expect. So I think this is going to be an absolute goal for us for the coming year, for over the summers, to really look at that data more closely and try to figure out where we can improve our instruction. And we should consider designing lessons in chunks. So this is the instructional designer in me. Rather than recording a 15-minute video, have a series of smaller videos that we can then string together as we move forward so that we don't have to recreate everything every semester. The last thing that I want to point out is it is our goal to return to some semblance of synchronous instruction, whether it's live or a webinar based. This goes back to what Cara was saying, is we saw that this past year removed the librarian from library instruction, and we need to get that back in there, just to make sure that there is that connection to a person as opposed to things. So I have a minute or two. I'm going to get on my soapbox a little bit because there are some broader considerations that I want to just point out in terms of asynchronous instruction. So while we're very pleased that the guided lessons served us well in this past year, and they were a great solution during a pandemic, we need to be careful when developing video content like this. So for instance, the idea of ownership as it relates to librarian expertise, by just putting out content as a video and giving it to someone else to teach, whether they're facilitating or teaching, who may not have the experience or the understanding of the content, we run the risk of downplaying the work that we do and the importance of libraries in higher education. Similarly, while we gladly pivoted to asynchronous instruction during the pandemic, it's important to remind administrators that the video is not a replacement for the experience of librarians. So we've had a lot of requests for asynchronous content this year, as I'm sure most of you have. And lastly, we need to continue to address these stereotypes about libraries and librarians that others have, including colleagues at our institutions, that everything's online or that we're just kind of hanging out waiting for someone to come ask us a question. These things don't serve us well, but they're hard to break. I mean, we're still struggling with it. So as a final thought, at a time when higher education is really being greatly impacted by a combination of reduced enrollment, lack of public funding, and then add on top of that COVID-19, it's more important than ever that we advocate for the important work that we do with our students, with our faculty and staff, and with our communities. So I would say as you develop asynchronous content, to keep those things in mind is how we can keep the librarians and the library in library instruction. So with that thought, oops, we're open to any questions. I think we're right about on time.
We have a couple of chat questions in the chat for Tony and Cara. One is whether or not you would share a link in the chat, and I'm assuming that is the link to that page that was shared with the facilitators. But Marjorie, if it's not that, if you could let us know, that would be great.
Do that. I'm typing it as we speak.
And then we also have a question about what web-based module software was used for the slides, I assume in the early iteration of the project.
Yeah, we struggled with how to explain that we did something before this without really explaining what we did. I used a handful of approaches. So early on, I actually built something from scratch using HTML and Cold Fusion, because we do have access to a Cold Fusion server. For those of you who might not be aware, that just lets you put a database connection to a website, sort of like PHP. The second version, we did something similar, but we used something called reveal.js, which is kind of a slideshow function for web pages, and it works really well with mobile phones. So if anyone's a web developer and you're thinking about trying to develop something scripted like this, that's a really great platform. And lastly, I would say though, I think I haven't experimented too much with it myself, but I think Google Slides and Google Forms, for those that don't have the infrastructure that we do here, could work really well to sort of incorporate that live response into your instruction. So
I'm pausing here. What other questions do we have from the audience? I know one that I was wondering was whether or not you ever got feedback from the facilitators as to how things went in the classes.
Well, I think last year we asked, but we didn't get much. This year we are just finishing the semester next week, so I think we're going to follow up with them to try to get that. I think Cara would agree with me that we've got some really excellent advocates for the library among our facilitators, you know, assistant vice presidents and faculty members, as well as staff members who maybe don't have the same connections. you know, it is sort of a question that we have. We are working on an assessment, a quick survey to go out to them to try to find out whether they followed the steps we gave them and whether there were problems that we didn't anticipate. So that is yet to come, unfortunately.
And we got a really nice glowing email from the program coordinator when we sent her all the stuff. And it was just this long paragraph. She's like, this is so much, this is worth the wait. This is so great. And like when she introduced us, she was just gushing, and it was, oh my God, thank you. But the individual facilitators, as Tony said, we're going to reach out and try to get some more feedback from them. Yeah.
And I think this goes back to the, I see a question I'll respond to in just a second. The challenge with having us sort of separated from the actual presentation of the content does make it challenging and will require a follow-up. So someone asked, did the link show up in the chat? Oh, thank you, Laura, for putting that back in there.
You're welcome. That got accidentally sent to just me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, thank you. I'm glad that you
I just realized that. And there's one more question. Apologies if I missed this, but who were the facilitators for Willpower for fall 2020 and spring 2021?
You know what? That's a good question. Cara, do you want to?
Yeah, so they're a mix from just the professional staff. Sorry, I'm using William Paterson terms, just the William Paterson staff, really. So I think some advisors would take them, but this wasn't an extra class. This wasn't overload. So I don't think you don't see a lot of traditional teaching faculty take these classes. So it's mostly William Paterson staff and advisors who are given the monumental task of doing this.
Yes, just as a sort of a addition to that, the advisors were primarily, this was made part of their job responsibility a year or two ago, that they would lead these Willpower cohorts, because as advisors, they could also take care of that piece of the needs of those students. So not only creating sort of a home for them and a cohort, a group of friends and classmates, but also guide them through registering for other classes, staying on track with everything.
I do have one more question in the chat, which I think may be our last question, and it is whether or not you both have any concern about the lack of an assignment for student involvement or the lack of a grade that might prompt student involvement.
Well, Cara, do you mind if I take a crack at this?
Please, yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, as Cara mentioned earlier, you know, traditionally there's never really been an assignment for Willpower or its predecessors, and it's always been our goal to try to create one that's relevant to the students. And as you know, that's difficult when they're not actually working towards something. So for us, our component, we feel, has a grade or a grade of sorts, air quoting, that we can use to assess our own portion. But we have seen, of course, the administration's reported that students are actually are very, engaged in the Willpower program. So if I'm not misunderstanding the question, Willpower as a whole is actually been very successful in terms of student retention and student participation. But in terms of the library assignment, yeah, we have had to kind of take matters into our own hands.
All right, I want to finish by thanking Cara and Tony, both of you. This was a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, have a great Thursday night, everyone.
Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.